Penny Hardaway looked like the kind of player who was supposed to define an era. He had size, creativity, ball handling vision, and that smooth, effortless style that made everything look easy. In the mid-90s, he felt like the perfect modern guard before the modern game had even fully arrived. Alongside Shaquille O'Neal in Orlando, Penny looked like the future of the league. Multiple All-Star appearances, deep playoff runs, and a game that blended flair with control made it feel like he was only getting started. That is what made the fall so cruel. The injuries did not slowly wear him down over a decade. They came early and they came hard. Knee problems, surgeries, cartilage damage, and the kind of physical decline that steals a player's first step before people are ready to accept it. Once that burst faded, so much of Penny's magic faded with it. By the time he reached the later stage of his career, he was no longer the rising face of the NBA. He was a painful reminder of what could have been. His downfall did not just take away a star. It took away one of the league's most haunting what-if stories. Andrew Bynum looked like the next dominant center the NBA could build around. He was huge, skilled, mobile for his size and still incredibly young when people started talking about him like a future franchise pillar. He helped the Lakers win championships, made an all-star team, and by 2012 it genuinely felt like he was stepping into his prime. That is why his collapse still feels so strange. This was not a player who faded in his late 30s. This was a player whose body started breaking down before his career ever had the chance to fully become what it was supposed to be. The knees were the real enemy. Dislocations, meniscus damage, swelling structural problems, one issue stacked on top of another until the foundation of his game no longer held. And for a 7-footer, once the knees stop cooperating, everything starts to go with them. By the time he left Los Angeles, the downward spiral was already obvious. Philadelphia traded for him and never even got a real version of him on the floor. Short stops followed. Very little production followed. And then almost unbelievably, it was over. Bynum did not just decline. He disappeared from the path that once looked built for stardom. Amare Stoudemire once felt like violence at the rim. He came into the league straight out of high school and immediately looked different. He was explosive, powerful, and built to destroy defenses in transition and in the pick and roll. With Steve Nash in Phoenix, he became one of the most dangerous finishers in basketball. 20-plus points a night, highlight dunks, all-NBA recognition. For a while, Amare looked like one of the easiest stars in the league to believe in. Then the knees began to take that version of him apart. Microfracture surgery is the kind of phrase that follows athletes like a shadow, and for Stoudemire it marked the beginning of a very different career. He still had moments. He even had a strong stretch in New York that made it seem like maybe he had beaten the odds. But the body kept collecting damage. The explosion faded. The consistency went with it. And once a player like Amare loses the lift that made him terrifying, he stops feeling like Amare. That is what made the downfall so jarring. He did not lose his name. He lost the force behind it. For a few years, Deron Williams belonged in every serious point guard conversation. He had strength control vision and the kind of calm command that made the game look slower when he had the ball. In Utah, he looked like the perfect floor general for a winning system. He could score, create punish switches, and run an offense without wasting motion. That is why his downfall never felt loud at first. It felt unsettling. The trade to New Jersey changed the environment around him, and not in a good way. The structure was weaker. The burden was heavier. And while he still put up numbers, the version of Deron that once looked so solid started to loosen. Then the ankles really took over. Swelling injections, surgeries, constant pain. For a guard whose game depended on balance, change of pace, and physical control, that kind of damage is devastating. He was still there, technically. But the burst was flatter. The rhythm was off. The authority he once played with started fading. By the end, he was no longer a franchise point guard. He was a former star trying to survive on a body that had already started pulling him backward. Deron Williams did not fall in one dramatic crash. He slowly drifted away from the version of himself that once felt automatic. Carmelo Anthony looked built to score forever. From the moment he entered the league, that part was obvious. He had size, touch, footwork, balance, and one of the cleanest scoring arsenals of his generation. In Denver and later at his peak in New York, Melo felt like the kind of player who could get a bucket against any defender in any situation. That is what made his decline so complicated. Because the talent did not suddenly disappear. The league just stopped rewarding his style the way it used to. As the NBA moved harder toward pace, efficiency, ball movement, and spacing, Melo's game started to feel older than it once had. The isolation scoring was still beautiful. The mid-range touch was still real. But the overall value of that approach was changing. And once the scoring volume dipped, there was no easy second identity waiting behind it. His minutes shrank. His role became awkward. In Houston, the fall suddenly looked real. A player who had once been a franchise centerpiece lasted only a handful of games before being moved aside. He did hang on longer after that, and he still had useful stretches. But the image had already changed. Carmelo Anthony did not just get older. He became a symbol of what happens when an elite scorer reaches the moment where scoring alone is no longer enough to hold everything together. Roy Hibbert's downfall might be one of the strangest because it felt like the league changed around him almost overnight. At his peak, he was exactly what teams wanted in the middle. He was massive, disciplined, and elite at protecting the rim. In Indiana, he anchored one of the best defenses in basketball and gave opponents real problems in the playoffs. For a while, Hibbert looked like the kind of center every contender needed. Then the game shifted. Fast, spacing got wider. Big men were dragged farther from the rim. Switching mattered more. Mobility mattered more. And suddenly the very things that made Hibbert valuable started feeling limited instead of essential. He could not stretch the floor. He could not switch comfortably. And once teams started forcing him into space, his impact changed dramatically. What made it even harder to watch was how fast the confidence seemed to go with it. The production dropped. The playoff performances became shakier. The aura disappeared. And once that happened, the fall was brutal. Roy Hibbert was not undone by one catastrophic injury or one giant scandal. He was undone by evolution. He was built for a version of basketball that stopped existing, and once that happened, his place in the league vanished far faster than anyone expected. Joakim Noah was never built to dominate with elegance. He dominated with energy, with emotion, with effort that felt almost violent at times. In Chicago, he became the heartbeat of a team that fed off toughness defense and constant disruption. He was not a pure scorer, but that was never the point. Noah mattered because he rebounded everything, protected the paint, passed better than people expected, and played every possession like it personally offended him to lose it. That is why the downfall felt so sharp once the body began to fail. After 2014, the signs were everywhere. The movement was worse. The lift was worse. The field goal percentage dipped. The minutes fell. Then came the knee problems, the suspension, the shoulder injury, and the steady sense that the edge which made him special was slipping away. And with Noah, that edge was everything. Once the body could no longer support that non-stop intensity, the rest of his game had very little room to hide. He bounced around after Chicago, but the version that had once looked like the emotional core of a contender was gone. Joakim Noah did not just slow down. He lost the force that made him feel alive on the floor. Victor Oladipo looked like one of the best comeback stories in the league right before he became one of its saddest injury stories. When he arrived in Indiana, everything clicked. He became an all-star, a top-tier defender, a steals leader, and the kind of two-way guard who seemed to be entering the true prime of his career. There was burst. There was control. There was confidence. For the first time, it felt like Oladipo had fully become the star people thought he could be. Then came the quad injury in 2019, and the entire path changed. That injury alone was devastating. But what made the downfall even crueler was that it never stopped there. Another surgery followed. Then more rehab. Then later, another major knee injury. At some point, the story stopped being about getting back to stardom and became about simply getting back on the court. That shift is what makes Oladipo's fall hit so hard. He did not lose his place because the talent disappeared. He lost it because his body kept targeting the exact traits that made him dangerous. The quickness, the lift, the ability to explode past defenders and rise over traffic. When those things went, the player people had just started to believe in at the highest level went with them. Kemba Walker's downfall was not loud. That is part of what makes it so sad. He was never built on size or overwhelming strength. He was built on quickness, balance, footwork, and the ability to create just enough separation to make defenders look helpless. At his best in Charlotte, Kemba was one of the league's most dangerous small guards. He could score in bunches, break defenders down off the dribble, and carry far more offensive responsibility than a player his size should have been able to handle. But players built like that live on thin margins. And once the knees started to go, the whole structure started to weaken. Boston was where the drop became impossible to ignore. The burst was lower. The recovery never looked complete. Every strong stretch seemed to come with another setback waiting behind it. From there, the decline felt quiet but relentless. Less lift, less rhythm, less trust from teams. What had once looked like a long prime turned into short stops, reduced rolls, and a game that no longer had the same sharpness. Kemba Walker did not crash in one dramatic moment. He just kept losing small pieces of the player he used to be until the full picture no longer looked the same. Lamar Odom's downfall feels different from most of the names on this list because it was never just about basketball. At his best, Odom was one of the most versatile forwards in the league. He could handle the ball pass like a guard rebound like a big and fit into winning teams without needing the spotlight. That is what made him so valuable. He was the connective tissue, the kind of player who made talented teams feel complete. And for a while, especially with the Lakers, he did exactly that. Then the structure around his life started to come apart. The trade out of Los Angeles seemed to hit him hard, and the basketball decline that followed never really separated itself from everything happening off the court. His conditioning slipped, his role shrank, the production dropped, and what once looked like a uniquely gifted all-around game started to feel distant. But with Odom, the real weight of the downfall came from how personal it became. Addiction, grief, emotional collapse, and a medical crisis that nearly killed him turned his story into something much heavier than a normal career decline. That is why his fall lands so hard. Lamar Odom was not just a player who lost his game. He was a player whose entire life seemed to unravel at once. And when that happens, basketball becomes only one part of the loss. What makes these downfalls so hard to watch is that they do not all break the same way. Some careers were taken by injuries before they ever reached their full size. Some were erased by a league that changed faster than the player could. And some collapsed under weight that had nothing to do with the scoreboard. But all of them leave behind the same feeling. Not just that a great player fell off, but that something bigger was interrupted. A future. A prime. A version of a career that was supposed to last much longer than it did.